Very good afternoon to all of you. Dr. Agarwal, Dr. Ganguly, it's a pleasure to be here and have a session with you, Dr. Ganguly. Now, while the topic what I have chosen primarily is from two very important aspects. One is the nature of business in which we are, which is IT services. And secondly, the kind of inventions or the innovations which come into my way, being an IP manager and handling intellectual property rights in an organization like TCS, which is 2.75 lakh plus, and you can imagine the pipeline of ideas which come in. So I thought I'll use this forum. Of course, a lot of knowledge on intellectual property has already been imparted by the previous speakers. So I thought I'll share some perspectives to add value to that. Though I have prepared the slides, I wouldn't go through them in that detail. Let me first start off from the point of view of intellectual property creation. You know, when you look at a business like IT services, I would look at the IP creation per se in two perspectives. One, the person down the line who is handling delivery, who is handling services, for him, the prime mover is the customer, and the customer demands many things, and he has to deliver what the customer requires. So his perspective would be to look at the customer problems and address it, and in that process, create assets, which are intellectual property assets for the organization. That is one way of, the way how the assets are created. The other side is, typically in the horizontals or the innovation labs, who have the leeway to look at or rather anticipate the requirements. The other man, the earlier person, was in a framework. He had a, what he call as a master service agreement, and he has to fit into that bill. But this man, who is a bit different function, he is in a horizontal, and he has the leeway to rather look at some of the anticipative requirement. Like typically in the sector which we are operating, and very competitive sector, we have to look at what are the emerging technologies, where should the services move. We can't just rely on where we are. So it could be the social media, it could be the mobility, it could be the analytics, or it could be where they want to position their future services. So when he creates an asset, it's more anticipative, and there he has the, at least the opportunity to look at a prior art very differently from the earlier person, because the earlier person is already in a framework. But this man has the, rather I would say, the time and the inclination as well to look at it in a much different way. So these are the two different types of or requirements under which the IP assets are primarily created. And they definitely pose a challenge because each have to be dealt differently. Because in the earlier scenario, you don't have much leeway to change because the customer demands it and you deliver it. But the second one, you have always the ability to mature the invention or move in the direction or move in the landscape, looking at both from your competitor point of view and your customer point of view. So this is a typical scenario in which we handle our IP creation requirements. So this slide is primarily to give you a picture on what kind of IP assets are created to unlock the business paradigms, which are software products, service process frameworks, technology and business components. I think these are the three broad categories I can think of. Now, most important, when we move on from this and we look at the IP management as a whole, we have to be consciously clear about what are the strategic goals which have been set by the organization and how is IP integrated into that. I think when Dr. Agarwal raised the point of IP management, especially when you raise the point of how this could be part of the managerial curriculum, it's highly important that these aspects are very carefully intertwined into the decision making of the organization, and that's where the IP management plays a very important role. So the strategic goals on which the business is built on, let's have a look at it. One is from the point of view of the nature of the business, which we are in, primarily a linear business model, there the intellectual property assets are primarily looked at key enablers to drive non-linearity. So it's the non-linearity growth component which is coming from the intellectual property assets. So it's very important in that perspective. Secondly, more important, to strengthen the existing solution footprints and also to optimize our service delivery. That's the second important element. Thirdly, the business itself is divided into various business verticals. Like if you see the earlier slide, you would have seen insurance, banking, telecom, automotive, and all these are the key verticals which the business has to serve. So when you create assets, it's very important that there is a cohesiveness and interoperability, which is very important from the point of view of the usage of the assets. Because when we create assets, we are definitely looking at serving that particular sector, but if it has the flexibility and if it has the maturity to address service requirements from other verticals, then it's the most ideal and desired situation. And of course, the other important element which has already been discussed, one is for the competitive advantage, second is for enforcing leadership position, and also more importantly to create the right differentiation. I think that's what the customer wants. So when they look at companies coming with the same kind of services, they would definitely try to look at what kind of differentiations we create, and that's where the intellectual property assets come in. And lastly, I think no management topic, any management topic is incomplete without mentioning the role of people. And that is where it is very important in an organization to motivate associates to be an inventor and create IP. I think that's the theme within TCS. And it's not just looking at the people who are just on the innovation labs, but as I said, people who are right now working for their clients in terms of offering services or who are at delivery pressures. It's very important to motivate and encourage them to be an inventor and create IP, because that creates the right volume or the pipeline of innovations which come in, and which is very important from the point of view of creation of IP. Then I would like to look at, as you will see, the heading of this slide is understanding the legal contours for computer-related inventions. Now, why this is important is, I'm not here to talk about the Section 3K limitations or what has been defined as the ancillary thereto or developed thereon. But what I'm looking at is, when I get an asset, typically from the scenario 1 and scenario 2, I have to see how that fits into the legal contours. And this is where the challenge lies. Because sometimes when we have experienced attorneys and when we discuss with them also, it would definitely need a lot of tweaking in terms of how we present it. But ultimately we face a challenge when we present it to the inventor, and who would always come back and say, of course, that was my earlier invention, but then after this, after you talk about the limitations of patentability of software and you could not use the word business or processes, is this my invention? I mean, I find there's a lot of difference. So that's where the challenge actually lies, in bringing the right balance between what the legality or the legal contours on which the computer-related inventions are drawn and how the innovations come in. Because they don't come in these kind of pockets. They come as a requirement. So we'll have to see how this could be fitting into the legal contours. Then the fourth important element is assessing an IP, and of course drafting of claims and patent specifications. So here, if you would see, these are the typical scenarios how you look at assessing an IP. But here, I would like to talk about some of the best practices which we adopt, where, of course, the patentability criteria are defined, which is novelty, utility, and inventive steps. And also, it's quite clear that we need to demonstrate sufficient technical effect. All that is done. But what is missing in this slide, and I think which is not talked much about, is the word sustainability. Now, this is very important because the fast-pacedness in which the technology is moving, Of course, we have 20 years time for patent to be granted, but the pace at which the competition is moving and the technology is progressing, it is very important when we create these kind of IP assets to know whether they can sustain the market pressures, whether they can sustain the technological advancement. Otherwise, these patents remain as patents as a piece of paper. You will not be able to enforce it. So there we believe for that invention to be more sustainable, we'll have to look at, we'll have to bring in the business angle apart from the novelty, utility, and inventive step which is described in the Patent Act. We'll have to also look at the sustainable elements, which is more anticipative, more agile, more adaptive, and more efficient. I think these definitions are very clear, but I want to specifically talk about anticipativeness in the context of the services which we drive. 5 years ago, whenever we would have thought that all our service models have to move into cloud. But today, that is what the customer wants. So 5 years ago, if some inventor was conceptualizing on a data transformation tool, I should have advised him to even anticipate this futuristic trend, which is where his services is going to move. And if he had placed that invention in that domain, probably that will be more sustainable. Because now the chances are that if that has not been anticipated in his invention, then it's most likely that it becomes obsolete. So this is one important point I want to drive home on the sustainability, which is part and parcel of our assessment and drafting of claims. Then if you look at what finally, some few concluding slides is that one is, of course, we need to encourage innovations, which is very important because there's always a difference between innovations and inventions. So while we have to encourage innovation because that's what the customer needs, but we'll also have to carefully mine inventions which could be matured for all these suitable forms of IPRs like patents or copyrights. And valuation, which is very important, both the book value of the invention and what actually the value of the patent when it hits the market, because they are very different. Because when an asset is created, we normally calculate on the basis of several other, which is more bookish and accountish. But then later on, when it actually meets the customer and the markets, the value of the IP totally changes. So we'll have to have a track of both the book value and the monetization value. And more importantly, IP as a portfolio, I think this is already discussed. So how do you build a portfolio of patent which is more strategic? Claim drafting strategies and how do we counter office actions and the new dimensions of litigation trends. I think these are all some of the challenges which we are in. And most importantly, understand the scope, whether we have freedom to operate in various geographies. Because the IP could have been created in one geography, but the challenge would be to monetize and commercialize in multiple geographies. So there again, that very important challenge comes in. And to end with, I just wanted to present a model. I think this is a model which we all use to drive IP management within our organization, which is called 3P into 3P strategy. While the ultimate objective is to promote, protect, and profit from IP, the underlying principle behind this is that we have to somehow measure how the IP management progression is taking place in various units. While we know what is the input, what is the output, the input has to be a very quality innovation, and same thing, the output would be how it hits and meets the market demand. Established, excel, and pioneer. So each of the units are benchmarked, and we actually physically see how they are progressing in terms of their IP maturity. I think with these few words, I end my presentation.